Picture this. You are 18 years old, sitting in your childhood bedroom, scrolling through a digital world of possibilities you cannot afford. You see it on your screen, a sleek, high-performance car. The light reflects off its curves in a way that feels almost personal. You take a screenshot. It sits there in your camera roll, a frozen piece of a dream that feels light years away from your reality. At that moment, the gap between who you are and who you want to be is an ocean. Most people look at that screenshot once or twice and eventually delete it to make space for more memes. But for some, that image becomes a ghost that haunts them. You didn't want the car just for the speed. You wanted it because it represented the version of yourself that had finally figured it out. Back then, you were working a job that barely covered your gas money, let alone a monthly payment on a supercar. You were tired of being a spectator in your own life. You saw the ads for dropshipping, the guys on beaches with their laptops, and for the first time, you didn't just scroll past. You wondered if there was a path through the noise. You decided to take a chance on something that sounded like a scam to everyone else. This is the story of how that one screenshot stayed in your gallery for 3 years while you slowly rebuilt your entire world to match it. You started without knowing a single thing about commerce, just a phone and a desire for more. Then comes the reality check. You started your first store thinking it was as easy as a few clicks and a TikTok trend. You found some cheap plastic gadget, uploaded some blurry photos from a supplier, and hit go. You expected the money to start flowing in like a waterfall, but all you got was silence. And when the silence finally broke, it was the sound of money leaving your bank account. You spent $50 on ads and made 0 sales. Then you spent $100. You finally got 1 sale, and the excitement lasted until you realized you had lost $20 on shipping costs and transaction fees. Then the emails started coming. Where is my package? Why is the quality so bad? I want a refund. You were 18, dealing with angry customers across the world, and realized that online selling is actually a logistical nightmare. You were getting crushed by the weight of things you didn't understand. You felt like a failure because the easy button everyone talked about didn't exist. You were selling products you didn't care about to people who didn't trust you. It was a chaotic entry into the world of commerce. Every day was a battle with ad accounts getting banned and suppliers going dark. You realized that dropshipping isn't a quick trick. It is a brutal education in supply chain management and consumer psychology. You were close to quitting, looking at that screenshot and thinking you were just a kid with a deluded fantasy. But you didn't stop. You realized you had to change your strategy. You had to stop selling trash and start selling value. This stage was your trial by fire, a moment where 90% of people quit. You kept pushing forward because the alternative was going back to a life you hated. You learned that failure is just data, and you were collecting a lot of it every day. You took a step back and looked at what was actually working in the market. You noticed that people don't just buy products, they buy identities. You shifted your focus away from random gadgets and toward a specific aesthetic. You found a niche that spoke to you. Accessories for people who wanted to elevate their personal spaces, their gaming setups, and their cars. You started looking for products that had a specific vibe, something that would look good on a desk or under a dashboard. You stopped being a middleman for junk and started being a curator for a lifestyle. This was the turning point. Instead of chasing the next viral fidget spinner, you focused on the community of people who care about how their world looks. You started understanding that a product is just a solution to a desire. You curated a collection of ambient lighting, high-quality desk mats, and custom interior accents. This wasn't just dropshipping anymore. It was the beginning of a storefront with a soul. You spent hours looking at Pinterest and Instagram, trying to understand what makes an image stop someone from scrolling. You realized that if you could make someone feel something about the product, the price became secondary. This pivot changed everything. You weren't just throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. You were building a catalog that told a story. You were building a world where that car from your screenshot actually belonged. This focus on a niche gave you the clarity to finally start making consistent sales. It was no longer about luck. It was about understanding your audience and delivering exactly what they were looking for to complete their vision. This strategic shift moved you from a desperate seller to an intentional entrepreneur with a growing market presence. Now came the hardest part, the actual work. You realized that to make real money, you needed real skills. You spent your nights diving into the technical side of Facebook and Google Ads, learning about pixels, conversion rates, and retargeting loops. You weren't just clicking buttons, you were studying the math of human behavior. You bought a camera and spent weekends learning how to take professional product photos because you knew that if the photo looked cheap, the product was perceived as cheap. You started communicating directly with suppliers, negotiating prices, and ensuring that the shipping times were slashed from weeks to days. You were building a network, learning how to manage a supply chain, and providing actual customer service. This was the grind. It wasn't glamorous. It was spreadsheets, long nights of troubleshooting, and constant testing. You were learning how to read data like a language. When an ad didn't work, you didn't get frustrated. You looked at the metrics to see where people were dropping off. You became an expert in the margin. You learned exactly how much you could spend to acquire a customer while still remaining profitable. About a year into this journey, something incredible happened. You looked at your dashboard at the end of the month and realized you had made more money in 30 days than you did in an entire year at your old job. It was the first moment of validation. The skills you had acquired were now generating a momentum that was undeniable. You weren't just a kid with a laptop. You were a business owner. Every hour of frustration and every dollar lost in the beginning had been tuition for the most valuable education of your life. You were now operating at a level that most people wouldn't even attempt, and the results were starting to show in your bank account and your confidence. This grind was the foundation of everything that was about to come next in your journey. Success in dropshipping is often temporary unless you turn that store into a brand. You realized that to stay in the game, you needed a brand that people recognized and trusted. You moved away from generic white label shipping and started investing in custom packaging and branding. You wanted the experience of opening a package from your store to feel special. You created a community around your niche, engaging with customers on social media and building an email list that became your most valuable asset. A brand is a promise, and you were committed to keeping it. This transition meant higher margins and more stable growth. You weren't just reliant on ads anymore. You had repeat customers and word-of-mouth growth. You started thinking about the long term. You weren't looking for a quick payout. You were building an enterprise. This was the shift from a side hustle to a career. You hired your first assistant to handle the day-to-day operations, allowing you to focus on the big picture. You were reinvesting every dollar back into the business, scaling your reach and improving your product line. You were no longer just selling car accessories. You were building the brand that would eventually pay for that car in the screenshot. The discipline it took to not spend your first profits on toys was what separated you from the people who fail. You understood that a business is a machine that needs fuel to grow. By building a brand, you created something with lasting value, something that didn't just depend on the next trend. You were creating a legacy, and the foundation was now stronger than ever. The vision was becoming clearer every day, and the distance between you and that screenshot was finally closing. You were no longer just testing products, you were building a recognizable name in your chosen market space. Let's talk about the mechanics of how this actually works. Most people see the car and the lifestyle, but they miss the financial engineering behind it. The formula is simple but difficult to execute. Dropshipping is the entry point, a way to test markets without heavy inventory costs. Once you find a winner, you transition into a brand, which stabilizes your revenue. That revenue creates cash flow. Now, this is where most people fail. When the cash starts flowing, they go out and buy the luxury items immediately. They buy the watches and the clothes to look successful, but you chose a different path. You understood the power of reinvestment. You took that cash flow and put it back into better inventory, more aggressive marketing, and professional infrastructure. You allowed your money to work for you. You were building a compounding effect. Instead of draining the tank to show off, you were adding more engines to the plane. You waited. You stayed in your lane and kept your expenses low while your revenue climbed higher and higher. This was the true wealth formula. You weren't just making money. You were building an asset. You were creating a system that could run without you being involved in every single task. This allowed you to scale to levels you previously thought were impossible. By the time you reached the 3-year mark, your business was a well-oiled machine. You had mastered the art of reinvestment, and your net worth was growing exponentially. The car was no longer a dream you had to save for. It was a small fraction of the cash flow your business was generating. You weren't buying it with your hard-earned savings. You were buying it with the excess profit of a system you built from scratch. This is the difference between looking rich and being wealthy. You played the long game, and now the game was finally paying out in a massive way. This was the ultimate realization of your financial strategy coming to life. 3 years later, you find yourself standing in a dealership. The smell of new leather and the glint of the paint are exactly how you imagined them. You pull out your phone and scroll back through thousands of photos until you find it, the screenshot from 3 years ago. You hold the phone up next to the actual car, and for a moment, time stands still. You aren't just buying a vehicle. You are buying the evidence that your former life was not the end of your story. You are buying the proof that the late nights, the failed stores, and the stress of those first few months were all worth it. This car is a trophy of your discipline and your refusal to accept a mediocre reality. You look back at that 18-year-old version of yourself, the kid who had nothing but a dream and an internet connection, and you wish you could tell him that it is all going to happen. But then you realize that the struggle was what made the win feel this good. You didn't just get lucky, you built this. You drive off the lot, and as you look in the rearview mirror, you don't just see a fast car, you see the road you traveled to get here. You see the person you had to become to earn this moment. The screenshot is gone now, the reality has taken its place. And the best part? This is still just the beginning. You have the skills, you have the mindset, and you have the proof that anything you can capture in a screenshot, you can eventually capture in real life. Your journey from a dreamer to a builder is complete, and now you are ready for the next level. The car is just the start of what is possible when you decide to never stop moving forward toward your goals.